So we're going to look at this arrangement by my friend João Lenhari, a great trumpeter from Brazil, of Horace Silver's Song for My Father. And actually, this gets to the first thing I look at before I even look at pitches or notes or rhythms is context. So this is Song for My Father, the Horace Silver tune, which is a very common song, very well-known jazz standard. And while I know João personally, I don't know his arranging style, so I can't make any assumptions based on that. But just from knowing that this is Song for My Father, that gives me something to look for in the tune. So what I'm looking for now as I go through the part is how much of this is related to the original Song for My Father and how much of it is new material or extended material or changed material. So obviously this means I know the chord progression of Song for My Father, I know the form of Song for My Father, and that's the first thing I look for as I scan the PDF. Or if I had printed music as I scan the part. So the first thing that pops out to me is this soli at the top on page 1, and then I'm just going to do a quick scan through the rest of the part. So this is still a soli on page 2. This is like a transition, and then on page 3, letter E, I see there's a DS, and I see the melody of Song for My Father with written ornamentation. And I'm just going to keep going. So this is still the head, and then at letter H, or sort of just preceding letter H, is where I see some additional material or new material, and letter I is not from the original song at all. So already in my head, I'm saying to myself, pay attention to the soli on the first 2 pages and pay attention to letter I. And then once we hit letter K, this looks like either a solo section or comping, I'm not sure what exactly, but it is the chord changes of the original tune. Letter N is a piano solo, so that's fine, and it's over the chord changes of the original tune with some minimal reharmonization or minimal chord extension specification, but it's not that. And then we have letter T, which is kind of a transition back to the DS, and that's not from the original, it's an extension, or it's new material. So already at the top, before I've even looked at notes or chords or anything else, I know that my attention needs to go to the soli at the beginning, letter I, and letter T. So that's the first step, is just letting the song title and what we call the print matter, song title, the composer, the arranger, letting that tell you as much information as you can to focus where you put your attention. The second thing I do is I look for signposts, I look for the form. So I'm going to look for, is there a DS? There's a DS at letter E. So if there is a DS, where is the 2 coda? The 2 coda is nice and big in the middle of letter J. And then I look at what the coda is, and I look for the DS-Al coda. So the DS-Al coda is on the last page at the end of letter T. And then the coda, and this is something very important, the coda is the same as this extension at measure 97. So in the case of piano players or a lot of rhythm section players, we don't have the luxury of making page turns quickly a lot of the time. Both of our hands are occupied on our instrument, and sometimes page turns can be clunky. And if you're using a PDF score reader, you can put shortcuts to just jump to the last page. But if you're reading this off of paper, it's handed to you in a rehearsal, you need to figure out where you're going, and if there's any shortcut you can use to avoid the page turn or delay the page turn, that's a good thing to do. So I am seeing that measure 97 is the same as the coda up until this 2-bar multi-arrest. So what I might do is make a note on this A-flat 7 chord, which is the last chord in common between the 2 sections. I might make a note here that on the coda, I have 2 bars to flip and find that last chord. So that's the second step, is to look for the form, look for the signposts, read any repeat instructions if things are open, if things are multiple times, if there's multiple boxes and multiple endings, just to get your formal situation sorted out before you even look at the notes. The third step is to start looking at the ink, to start looking at the notes. So in the case of the soli that starts this arrangement, this is the primary place where there are written notes, written melodies that have to be played as is, and at the end of it there are given voicings too. So this is really where sight reading is important. And then for me, what I do is the first thing I look at is rhythm. I would argue that getting the rhythm right and sitting inside of the ensemble is much more the priority than whether you played a D flat or a D natural here. If you can get the contour of the line really quickly, and maybe you mess up an accidental here or there, getting the flow of the line is much more important in a high pressure situation. Having chord symbols can help you figure out what the notes might be. So in the case of the third bar, it's on an E flat 9 chord. I'm going to assume that this D is flat because that's in the chord. This is written without a key signature. If there were a key signature provided, I would definitely make sure to pay attention to that and make sure that I remember that we're in 4 flats or whatever the key signature might be. So again, as I read this down, the first thing I notice is that it's marked 8 VA, and it's a pretty sparse line. There are a couple of things that don't really make sense pianistically, so those are the things that I would have to figure out fingering wise. And then the other thing I look for is where the 8 VA gets canceled. So the loco cancellation here means that the first 2 pages are basically all 8 VA. So I'm not wasting time looking for where it ends. If this were not an actual big band situation or an actual rehearsal situation, but I was practicing my sight reading at home, I would take it under tempo. It's pretty rare that you will find yourself in a situation where you actually need to sight read at performance tempo, at performance level. If you're given a part in a big band rehearsal, you will have a couple of minutes to do this primary look over before you actually start playing the music, and you will probably play it under tempo because there's likely soli lines that need to be rehearsed. It's pretty rare the amount of times that I've needed to actually fully sight read in a performance. So in Joao's chart, it says Samba Gringo. And again, this goes to knowing Song for My Father originally. The groove of Song for My Father is this kind of air quotes Latin feel, which is a Americanized samba feel or an Americanized bossa nova feel. And then when João specifies Latin later in the chart, I took that to mean a real Afro-Cuban situation, and I played Montuno. João also sent me in the email a reminder that there would be a guitarist on this, so to keep my comping a little bit more sparse and a little bit more strict to the provided chord symbols. So as we see here at letter I, Joao's chord symbols with extensions are pretty specific. That will happen in a big band situation where your chord symbols reflect the voicings that are used in the saxophone and brass sections. So as a pianist, you need to be aware of how to grab voicings really quickly. Your voicings and your harmonic knowledge kind of need to be on autopilot so that when you see these chords in quick succession, that you can just get all or part of the voicings and not really be calculating every single note the whole time. Other shortcuts that are useful are being able to recognize common rhythms. So I can just look at this, and by the shape of it, I can see that it's all dotted quarter notes for 3 bars, and then it ends on the E flat 7 altered. So I'm not really calculating the rhythm. Same thing here at 97. I can see that this is a repeated figure. So once I've figured it out the first time, I know it just repeats. The other thing is to not get thrown off. Here at letter E, there's a lot of notes, but then you just need to understand that this is the head of Song for My Father with a written out ornamentation. Often this might be noted just as a turn, but here João has decided to notate the ornamentation because there are multiple people in the ensemble playing it. And since we're not rehearsing in person and we don't have a lead alto player or a lead trumpet player to dictate what the ornamentation might be, João has decided to notate it. And for this chart, I think that about covers it. It's a pretty simple chart. It's a great arrangement. João asked a ton of great players to be part of it. I'm very happy that he asked me. I hope this helps you in giving you some shortcuts and some ways to think about how to process a lot of material and a lot of information quickly when you're sight reading. If you have any further questions about sight reading, especially in a big band context like this, please leave me a comment below. Hop over to Patreon, support the channel, follow me on all the other social media platforms at Ryshpan Music. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week.